all it takes is one bad day for a good man to become a monster. Arthur Fleck, a party clown, gets ready to go to work. He looks in the mirror and twists his mouth up and down as a solitary tear runs down his cheek. He goes out to the street and dances while promoting a sign for the store that hired him. Then some kids take the sign from him and run away. Arthur chases them to an alley where the cruel kids end up beating him and kicking him. After a day to forget, Arthur goes to see his therapist. The man laughs uncontrollably. His laughter is a tragic contradiction, an act usually associated with joy and pleasure. But for him, it only expresses suffering. It's as if his laughter is a form of crying, a way to release the anguish he feels inside. Arthur mentions how difficult things are getting outside. She agrees. It's tense. People is angry. The therapist asks about his journal and Arthur hands it to her, saying he's been using it as a joke book because he wants to be a comedian. She skims through it and finds some disturbing text. I just hope that might make more sense than my life. The woman asks him how he feels about coming to these sessions, and Arthur responds that he felt better when he was locked up in the hospital. Arthur asks the therapist if they could increase his medication, and she points out that he is already taking 7. He just wants to stop feeling bad. The therapy ends and Arthur gets on a bus. However, the boy's mother gets upset and tells him to stop. Arthur starts laughing uncontrollably and the lady gets offended, so the man hands her a card to apologize, explaining that he laughs because of a neurological condition. This condition is real. It's called pseudobulbar affect, which makes a person laugh uncontrollably and inappropriately and develops due to a neurological disorder or a brain injury. Arthur arrives at the building where he lives, which is in terrible condition. He checks the mailbox and then goes up to his apartment where he lives with his sick mom, Penny. She asks him if they received any mail, but he replies that they didn't. Penny has been writing letters to her former employer Thomas Wayne and hopes to receive a response someday. Following that, the Mary Franklin talk show starts, and while they watch, Arthur imagines being in the audience, and Franklin notices him and asks him to introduce himself. In the fantasy, Arthur introduces himself and says he is with his mom, and that his purpose in life is to spread joy and laughter, which Franklin respects, so he asks him to come down to the stage. Arthur comes down amidst applause, and there Franklin tells him that he would give up everything to have a son like him. And then they hug. Young Arthur returns to reality and smiles. This fantasy shows us a bit of Arthur's psychic world. He cares for his mother religiously, and in return she validates him for being a good person. Arthur takes pride in that and desires external validation. The next day at work, his colleague Randall found out about the beating he received and gives him a weapon to protect himself. Then the boss calls Arthur and tells him that the clients complained about him for disappearing and not returning the sign. Arthur explains that he was assaulted, but his boss doesn't believe him, so he tells him that the sign will be deducted from his salary. Arthur leaves and kicks a trash can to release his valid frustration. Then he returns to his apartment, sharing the elevator with his neighbor Sophie and exchanges some smiles with her. Then Arthur baits his mother while she asks him again if he has received any letter from Wayne. Arthur asks her what she expects and she replies that she wants his help. But Arthur asks her not to worry about the money because his comedy show will be a great success. The next day, Arthur follows Sophie around the city and in the afternoon attends a comedy monologue to take some notes, which he continues developing when he gets back home. He is seen writing with his right hand, but suddenly he becomes curved and switches hands. It seems like there is something else growing inside him. He smiles and writes, "The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to..." And this leads many to dismiss them and show little empathy. This sentence is a critique of the misunderstanding and mistreatment of mental illness, expressing the struggle of people with mental conditions who are expected to conform to social norms of behavior but do not receive adequate support or understanding or empathy from people. Making their struggle heavier in that Sophie knocks on his door and asks if he has been following her. Arthur responds that yes, they both joke about it, and he makes her laugh. Sophie tells him, "You're funny, Arthur," though it seems strange for her to call him by his name since he never gave it to her. Nonetheless, he decides to invite her to a comedy show he will perform soon. The next day, Arthur works as a clown entertaining sick children, but during his act, his gun falls to the ground. His boss finds out about the incident and is angry. Arthur tries to convince him that the gun was just a prop, but he doesn't believe him since his colleague Randall claimed that he wanted to buy a gun last week, and finally he does. Filled with frustration, Arthur takes the metro to return home. In the same car, there are 3 men harassing a woman. Arthur suddenly starts laughing, drawing the attention of the men who, offended, start harassing him. Arthur tries to explain himself, but the guys hit him. Fed up with the cruelty of others, the clown takes out his gi and ends the lives of the 3. Arthur realizes what he did and panicked starts running until he reaches the restrooms of the local park. There, the anxiety fades away, and then He starts dancing. That other part of him that lives inside re-emerges. Moments later, he returns to his apartment building and very sure of himself, something unusual about him, he knocks on Sophie's door, and when she opens, Arthur kisses her and spends the night. Together, the next day, Arthur goes to his job to collect his belongings and hears his co-workers discussing the news of a clown who shot 3 men. They also offer words of sympathy, including Randall, whose hypocrisy irritates Arthur, so he tells everyone it was his gun that did it. Arthur returns home and after taking his last pills, joins his mother to watch the news. On them, Thomas Wayne appears because the murdered men were employees of his company, and he assures that they were educated and decent men. They ask him about the new anti-rich sentiment in the city, and Wayne says he wants to be mayor to solve it. When asked about the killer, he says that hides his face because he is a coward and practically labels the less privileged as clowns who do nothing with their lives. This angers many people who, as a protest, take on the clown figure as a banner. The unrest and civil demonstration are inevitable in any broken system that serves some populists. Days later, Arthur goes back to see his therapist. He complains that she never listens to him. He tells her that he finally feels he exists and people are starting to notice him. But she only responds by telling him that the government has cut their funding and this will be his last session and they won't be able to give him more medication. She also adds that the government doesn't care about people like him or like. But the funny thing is that when people commit crimes, they often emphasize their mental conditions. At night, Arthur performs his comedy show in a bar. Sophie is present when he goes on stage. He starts laughing uncontrollably, and when they finally manage to read some jokes, they are not funny. Arthur returns to his apartment and reads a new letter his mother wrote in which she claims he is Wayne's son. He immediately confronts his mother and Penny explains that she and Wayne were in love but had to keep up appearances. The next day, Arthur visits the Wayne mansion and meets a young Bruce who, for those who don't know, later became in Batman. Arthur performs some magic tricks and then Alfred appears, threatening to call the police. The clown tells him he is Penny's son and that he wants to see Mr. Wayne because he knows everything, but Alfred responds that his mother was delusional and laughs at him. Returning home, Arthur finds that his mother is being taken to the hospital because she had a stroke, and he gets into the ambulance to accompany her. At the hospital, 2 police officers approach him wanting to question him about the subway incident, as his former boss told them about it. Of the gun with the children, Arthur, while smoking a cigarette with his right hand, replies that it was just a prop and goes back to see his mother in the room. Arthur turns on Franklin's show only to end up hurt when the host shows clips of his comedy act to make fun of him by calling him a joker. Back in his apartment, they watch the news of people protesting with clown masks outside a cinema where Thomas Wayne is. Arthur decides to go and sneaks into the building. He meets Wayne in the bathroom and tells him that Penny is his mother. Thomas tells him that his mother was crazy, that she was in Arkham Hospital and that he was actually adopted. Arthur gets frustrated, which makes him laugh. Wayne gets offended and hits him. Therefore, before leaving, the few pillars on which his tragic life was supported. The next day, he receives a call from Franklin's production inviting him to appear on the show, and Arthur obviously accepts. Afterwards, he takes a bus to Arkham Hospital where he reads his mother's file and confirms that she was psychotic and that he was adopted. But he also discovers something chilling. Penny raised him with a boyfriend who abused. Arthur returns home and enters Sophie's apartment unannounced. She finds him and is frightened, asking him to leave. Arthur and Sophie, they never spent time together. Their entire relationship was a product of his mind. At this moment, Arthur has lost his identity. Now he is a blank slate, erased from the past he thought he knew. He is neither Fleck nor Wayne. He is just an adopted person without a recorded name. And this is timely for that other part of him that was manifesting to take control. The next day, Arthur visits his mother while he smokes a cigarette with his left hand. He tells her that his laughter is not a sickness but part of his personality. Then he adds that he used to think his life was a tragedy, but now he sees that it is actually a comedy. And after this, his other personality, which will adopt the name Joker, has taken the forefront. It is the only piece of identity he has left and the only one that has made him feel noticed and empowered. Arthur suffered abuse and recurring trauma in his childhood, so it's possible that he dissociates from himself as a way of protecting himself from extremely stressful situations. The character's duality is seen in that Arthur is right-handed, Joker is left-handed. Arthur is shy and insecure, Joker is strong and confident. Arthur's body language is hunched, tense, and nervous, whereas Joker's is upright, free, and fluid. Arthur is an agent of good, Joker is not. On the other hand, he realized that his life is a comedy. Pascal said that nothing makes us laugh as much as the surprising discrepancy between what we expect to happen and what we see happening. Furthermore, comedy often highlights ridiculous aspects of life. Arthur's life and what he experienced is ridiculous. It's absurd to expect a child who was mistreated, treated and abused, and who still tries to be good receives only humiliations and misfortunes. But that's exactly what we see happening. His life is a comedy that highlights the absurdity and incongruity of a society that expects him to be a productive and functional member. But no matter how hard he tries, he continually finds it impossible to meet that expectation due to his mental condition and his violent and unpleasant social environment. Later, Arthur gets ready for Franklin's show. He dyes his hair green and begins to put on makeup, but is interrupted by a man. It's his former colleagues Gary and Randall who visit him after learning about Penny's death. Although Randall is only worried because the police have been questioning clowns and Arthur has his gun. Then, fed up with their hypocrisy, he points it out. Gary gets scared, but Arthur lets him go without hurting him because he was the only one who treated him well. This story is not about excusing or justifying the Joker, but about better understanding how people fall through the cracks. It only takes one bad day to drive the sanest man into madness, said the Joker in the comic. What happened to Arthur can be prevented with more care, support, understanding, and compassion by being better people and treating others with respect and so on. Arthur runs away and enters the subway, which is full of people wearing clown masks going to the protests. This causes the police to get confused and he manages to escape unnoticed. Moments later, he arrives at the studio. While waiting in the dressing room, Franklin approaches to ask him not to make protests or controversies. Arthur tells him not to worry and asks to be introduced. Just as Franklin called him when he mocked him, shortly after they call him to the stage and he enters. Dancing. He tries to tell a joke about death but only receives mockery. Then he admits to being the subway killer and gives a speech about how the system fails ordinary people. The city is outraged by the death of the Wayne employees, but if someone like him had died, no one would have cared. He adds that people are horrible nowadays and no one is empathetic and tells Franklin that he is just as horrible for bringing him on the show to mock him. He points the gun at him and delivers his final punchline. What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a system that treats him like trash? You get what you deserve. And with this joke, the Joker literally blows Franklin's head off. The whole city watches the broadcast, and the protests, they explode. Arthur is arrested, but while they are taking him, the patrol car is hit by an ambulance driven by protesters, leaving Arthur unconscious. The rebels take him out of the car and lay him on the hood. Arthur wakes up and finds himself surrounded by protesters clapping and cheering for him, and he responds, dancing. On the other hand, the Waynes come out of a theater when a protester follows and shoots Thomas and his wife, leaving only young Bruce alive. Days later, Arthur is with a therapist at Arkham Hospital. The facility looks very different in this scene. Arthur laughs, but this time he does it for fun. The therapist asks what he finds so funny and he just replies that she wouldn't get it, and he starts to sing. Finally, we see the Joker walking down the hallway leaving bloody footprints. Could it be that everything was imagined by Arthur? It's really impossible to know what was real and what wasn't. Arthur showed us that he is not a reliable narrator. Even in the comic, the Joker says, sometimes I remember it one way, sometimes another. If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. But let's note that Arthur no longer laughs in pain, but for fun. Which reflects the other personality that is now his identity. In this sense, perhaps throughout the entire movie, what we saw was a transformation process, and the bloody footprints symbolized the definitive death of Arthur and the birth of the Joker. In short, this film is an examination of a broken system that creates its own monsters. It takes a village to raise a child, and the child who is not embraced by his tribe will burn the village down as an atoll to feel its warmth. Ai ho vinto, ai non ponti ai.